Thanks for coming out to the CELS Forum, the November 2019 edition. And I'm really pumped about this panel. We have a great group of speakers, seasoned veterans, or as I'd like to say, battle proven in their spaces, respective spaces. And just a quick introduction. I'm fronting for a group called Canadian Entrepreneurs in Life Sciences, and our mission is to help Canadian life science startups be successful in navigating through the wilds of the Bay Area. And that's simply what it is. We're a not-for-profit, and we're all here to outreach, answer questions, and solve some of the essential problems in making the right connections in the Bay Area. So we encourage you to come up and speak to any one of the directors that are here, or myself, and or as well, there's on the website, you can find all the information. And if you're not a member yet of CELS, we also provide an incentive for you to join. And you'll notice there's a promotion code on the screen, Invest19, and you can get a free one-year membership by applying that promotion code. So without further ado, I just want to turn over this event to our moderator. But before progressing to that next step, I want to thank J&J, or J Labs, for hosting us here. They've been wonderful supporters of our program, and I can't say enough about them. I mean, they provide not only here, but at various centers around the world, great accelerator support for innovation and startups. I think I should also make mention of one of our patrons, and that's Melinda Richter, who basically is the executive vice president that leads J&J Innovations, and she is a Canadian, and she feels very strongly about this organization and has been a great supporter. So that said, I'd like to turn it over to Hatem Charabi, who will in turn introduce this great panel that have all come out to join us today. And I personally like to thank the panel for being here with us as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and for joining us today. I'm very happy to moderate this panel, and I've spoken to our panelists a week ago, I think, and right away I knew it was going to be a smooth ride because of the great ideas and the great things they have to share. I have to say it's the first time I'm actually moderating a panel where the speakers come from a lot of different backgrounds. So it's kind of unusual. They have different expertise, but they have one thing in common. They know Canada well, and we're going to be speaking about Canada now that we have the federal election behind us and some provincial elections behind us. It's going to be interesting to hear from them, overall where Canada is today, where it's going, and in terms of perspective for US investors, but as well as US startups, what to expect from Canada, the challenges and the strengths and the opportunities in Canada. So again, very quickly, my background, I'm the managing director of a company called Spire Advisory Group, and we are a virtual accelerator in the Bay Area, and we work a lot with Canadian companies. So the idea for us is to give visibility to a lot of great ideas that are not here in the Bay Area, and give them visibility here. And we worked with the consulate a few times, as well as other organizations from different countries. But obviously, we see the potential in Canada. So we're very much looking forward again to this panel. What I'd like to do is let each one of you introduce themselves. A quick idea of your backgrounds, whether you're in Canada or in the US, and also very quickly in the intro, mention something that you think is pertinent today about doing business in Canada. So why don't we start? Pavan, why don't you start? Because let's be gentlemen and have the woman start first, and then we'll go to Paul on the other side. Go ahead, Pavan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pavan Dillon. I am a Canadian, born and raised in Vancouver. And I've been here in the Bay Area for about 2 years almost. It's hard to believe it's already been 2 years, but I moved here and I launched my own practice, which is as a Canadian immigration attorney. And I felt it was an opportune time to do so. And one of the things that I would stress and focus on is the fact that right now is really a great time for Canadian companies to really draw in global talent. And that's primarily because of some significant changes that the government has made in the last few years.
Very good. Paul, you want to go next?
Sure. Okay. So because I cover a lot of decades, I'm going to go give you a very quick snapshot of each decade. So I'm a dual citizen, grew up in Montreal, went to McGill, went to Berkeley grad school, and we're both on the Berkeley Canadian Studies Committee, I'm part one myself. I started off in high tech with big companies, RCA, GE, got involved when the US was the nexus for all high tech, worked on the first microprocessor, worked on first video game, so on. Went to GE, spent an hour arguing with Jack Welch, but he then gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. Then I got involved starting companies, chip companies. My first one was actually when the world went from those big CRT displays to flat ones. We had a chip in every display 20 years ago, big IPO. Started a few more chip companies since then. Been doing angel investing for decades. 2 years ago, I realized that the investment world needs something new to deal with the two big issues with startups. One is, if you look at startups, unfortunately, every CEO looks wonderful, every CEO looks promising, every CEO is going to conquer the world. You look backwards in time, you find that a relatively small percentage are actually successful in the sense of giving you a good return. And so we found a process to find literally the one company in 50, and we put it all in a public company, so it's liquid. So you don't have the issue of my last chip startup when I'm still chairman. Started 10 years ago, raised over $100 million, and I got half my net worth in there, but it's not liquid. I'm on 2 Canadian startup boards, and I do try and give back by helping Canadian companies. And I'm going to turn the title around a bit, and I'm going to focus on my comments on what the Canadian companies need to do to be successful and to raise money in the US, as opposed to Canadian US investors looking at Canadian companies. There's some things that Canadian companies do that I think is counterproductive in getting in the way of their own success. So I'll cover some of that in the Q&A period.
Sam, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Sam Ifrigan from Toronto. I'm an ex-medtech entrepreneur. Co-founded a company in the ultrasound space. We sold to Fuji. After that, founded IGAM Partners. We are, over time, we became the largest VC investor in Canada in terms of dollars invested in actual investments in Canada. And our focus is primarily medical devices and healthcare software platforms that are aimed at clinicians. We're early stage investors, seed, Series A's, where we like to begin with a company, and then we just keep following on in follow-on rounds. We have quite a slew of portfolio companies, some that have systems in the Bay Area here, and that's it pretty much.
Very good. Thank you. Joe?
Hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me here today. I'm a partner at Blake Castles and Graydon, which is a national Canadian law firm, and I practice in corporate finance and M&A. I've been working with or for life sciences companies for over 30 years. I have a degree in pharmacology and human biology, worked at Marion Merrill Down clinical research, among others, and then carried on with law. In terms of comments today, we were asked for 3 or 4 minutes to sort of summarize themes. And I'm a big advocate for life sciences companies in Canada. And I've witnessed incredible changes over the last, over my career, but especially in the last 10 years. And I was thinking a little bit about how I could comment either on a general theme, and it's a bit hard without giving you a bit of context. So I think I can summarize 5 key points, and I'll give you 3 examples, and then I'll tell you why from a context perspective it's representative of a lot of initiative and effort by companies in the Canadian marketplace. So I really believe that the current landscape in Canada involves critical mass, stable growth, leading technologies, strategic evolution, and a bright future. And all of those as broad statements, you have to look at individual examples, but then also the backgrounds of why those things are representative of these aspects that I think we're living today. And if you were to look at a couple of examples, for example, Zymeworks just raised US 200 million. Clarissa Desjardins recently, not that long ago, founded Clementia, and it was sold for over $1 billion. Then you look at Versant's funding very recently of two companies, Repair and Chinook. So on the face of it, you might say that, you know, we're at a point in time where these things are just happening. But if you look at it with a bit more detail and context, you understand that there's been a lot of evolution within the industry and a lot of learning by sort of circumstance and by adversity, right? And Clarissa is an example of someone who knows how to identify a good opportunity, build a team, and raise financing. And she's a serial entrepreneur, and that didn't happen by accident, right? That took time to evolve. Zymeworks, it sounds wonderful. They're currently approaching a $2 billion US market cap. I helped Ali Tarani, a young, driven entrepreneur at the time, incorporate that company 16 years ago. So 3 years ago, after 13 years of evolution and development, they went public on the NYSE and TSX. 1 year ago, raised 100 million and just raised 200. And I think they have, and all of this was done out of Vancouver. So for anyone to say it can't be done in Canada, I challenge you on that. And then Repair and Chinook are other examples where Gerald Davis, if you didn't know this, you would just think maybe Versant invested in them out of, you know, the United States. But Gerald moved to Canada about 8 years ago and had a definite belief that there was opportunity in Canada and significant opportunity. And he's proved that thesis throughout his 8 years in Canada through many successful investments, including recent large ones that I just identified. So for those of you who think it can't be done, I would say it can. And part of it just comes from if you have excellent science and skilled management teams, and you're willing to adapt, you can get financing in Canada. To be frank, not every company deserves to be financed. So if there's a true market and excellent management, then I've seen companies be successful in raising money regardless of the border, and not just from the States, from Europe and elsewhere.
So I think we know where Joe stands in terms of how he feels about Canada, which is great. Marwan, you want to go?
Yes, so Marwan Barad, I'm actually in the Bay here. I moved to the Bay about a year ago. I am part of an incubator in medical devices. I've been in medical devices for about 17 years now, both on the development side, a little bit of venture, and now in the incubation side. What I do is really try to find projects that can turn into a venture and finance those or push them forward. My journey is a little bit different. Started actually my engineering background here in the US. Lived here for about 11 years. Then I moved to Montreal, Canada, obviously, and had a couple of businesses there. So I was both on the hiree side and as an employee and employer side. I lived in Canada for 10 years. Then I moved from Montreal to Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is a hospital number 2 in the US and number 1 in cardiovascular and cardiology. I ran their innovation for about 4 years before I moved to the Bay Area. So more of the hands-on, the guy who needs to come up with the stuff and then bring it forward and interact with some of the individuals here. I hired a lot of people also when I was in Canada. I have to say that the quality of the talent of the engineering side, at least, is very high. I think most of us are from McGill, so go McGill.
It's funny because when we had a chat on the phone, I think, is it 4? How many of us here went to McGill? Yeah, so
Yeah.
so
I
Joe,
visited.
you're not supposed to be in the panel.
Absolutely. So I hired, run companies there, so I understand really the quality of the labor. I do agree with the comment that what's lacking really in Canada is those CEOs, those leadership, that leadership that can actually move ventures forward. It does not mean that people or the technologies are not good. I think we're missing some of the people in Canada. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to come back to the US, and especially to the Bay Area. In medical devices, this is where you want to be as far as an ecosystem. It's very important to understand that there's no perfect ecosystems. And then you cannot just say, look, I'm going to go to Canada, I'm going to find all of what I need there to grow as a company. I think at least my vision is, how can we build bridges? How can we come from the east to the west, from the US to Canada? I think there are talents all over the place. Some of it has more cost effective in Canada than here, and then vice versa. So looking forward to discussing some of those topics.
So I think this is a first topic. I know we discussed this when we spoke on the phone. It comes, in many other conversations that I have, I hear sometimes that some of the challenges of Canada is the tested talent, that there is a problem with a challenge in that sense. And I think we've heard from Joe that, you have some of those entrepreneurs that have been successful that he just mentioned. Let me ask Sam first, because he's the one now,
Last one left in Canada.
Exactly. You're not the last one in Canada, but you're one of the few. I mean, you are on the panel. You're the one who basically is dealing with those startups in Canada. So what do you see in terms? Are they challenges in terms of talent?
We're extremely bullish. Obviously, that's where we're investing our money. I think Canada is really good at research. The federal and provincial governments pours billions of dollars literally into life science research. We're horrible at commercialization, and that's kind of what we're trying to bring to the table. We have our network of there's our capital, obviously, but second is our network of executives that are needed at different stages of each company. Do
you find them? Are they?
We're able to attract executives from all over the world. I mean, there's a lot of people in our portfolio company from my old team when I was an entrepreneur, and they've all had positive experiences and have gelled as managers. But we're able to attract people to Toronto. And the last 5 years, especially, I've seen the ecosystem really transform itself in terms of, Mars became highly active. There's a lot of new money coming into the ecosystem. And so, our view is we don't invest in Silicon Valley. We don't invest in Boston because we think that there's a lot of competition and things are overvalued. And we think in Toronto, innovation is just as strong, but things are undervalued because there's not enough capital.
Do you have the people to take those companies to the next level?
Yeah, we're able to attract them. Okay. And it's becoming easier and easier. I think Toronto, is being recognized as a hub. What's going on down here in terms of politics is helping us up there. So
I have no idea what you're talking
about. Yeah. And so the government's I'll save my comments on the political side in Canada, but they generally we've done a good job. In terms of facilitating and nurturing startups. We could do better, but we're pretty good at it. Yeah.
I think there's a nuance that goes with that, and I sort of put this in the bucket of forced evolution. And HR and talent recruitment has always been a critical issue. And for many companies of substance that I work with, who haven't been able to recruit people into Canada, because not everybody wants to move to Toronto or Vancouver or whatnot. They've all incorporated US subsidiaries and have material offices in the US, and they're able to bridge between the two sets of management. Maybe it's not perfect, but they've definitely been able to bridge the gap or find a way to resolve those problems without physically moving the headquarters. Right?
I see. Pavan, sorry. Go ahead. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was going to give also an example of another company in Quebec, Opsense. Most of their sales teams actually, or leadership in the sales team, are US, and they're doing very well now on the TSX market. Back to your point, and having people here in the US trying to attract the talent to help companies commercialize some of their technology. Baylis Medical is doing also the same thing.
A lot of companies with modern technology can be very virtual, right? It almost doesn't matter where the people are.
Absolutely.
And cloud-based, computing and everything. It's very possible to run a company virtually and well.
Yeah. So Pavan, I think this is a good time for you to tell us a little bit about. So Sam, even though he didn't want to speak about the political thing, there is obviously a political aspect with what's going on in the US. How do you see it today in terms of, are there incentives from Canada to drive talent to Canada from the US and elsewhere?
So I think one of the main things, and I've been a Canadian immigration attorney practicing in the United States for over 7 years, and I started my career in Canada, but I moved out here. So I've seen like a good, I'd say, span of political policies that have come into place. And most recently, obviously, there's been a lot of this in the news, but the H-1Bs, which is one of the most popular ways to gain foreign workers into the United States, there's been a lot of requests for evidence and a lot of denials. And what that's leading to is a lot of fear as well. So my office here is constantly bombarded with people who are very worried about their future in the United States. And many of them, especially if they happen to be from a country that is really taking a long time for those individuals to become green card holders. Some individuals are stuck in green card processing for over 20 years. And then you take that on one side of it, and then you take Canada's policies on the other. And since 2017, 2016, they've been really focusing on drawing in global talent. And it's been an exceptionally positive experience for individuals. And it's really leading to some excellent candidates that come in. And sometimes when they send me their resumes and I look at it and I'm like, you have to apply for jobs in Canada. Like, this is a wonderful opportunity. They are graduates from like the best universities in the United States. They have years of experience and they're worried and they need a home to go to. And they just don't
even if
know.
it's a cold home.
But
and it's interesting to see that type of excitement when I talk to people, and I get to explain how wonderful Canada's policies are because it is instrumental. And the other thing I would say is that those are the individuals that contact me. Then there are the companies that contact me, and those companies are terrified of losing their best innovator and talent because that they won't be able to employ them any longer because they're not able to keep them here. And so they're running into issues and they want to open an office in Canada, and they'll do that because they need to keep and retain.
US companies like Microsoft and Amazon in Vancouver taking over so much space.
Real estate.
They're going to drive your prices up like here, you're going to see.
It's already up,
much
right?
higher.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. So we spoke about the talent. Let's speak about the money now. And Paul, I'd like, I know you made a couple of comments. I remember when we spoke on the phone about stocks and some of you feel sometimes the challenges that an investor may have in investing in a Canadian company.
Yeah, so there are a number of challenges that the simplest one, of course, is that a lot of the more sophisticated angel investors or groups like the Band of Angels and so on don't want to invest in non-C Corp, U.S. C Corp, Delaware corporations. And we at Quito don't mind. We've actually made investments in Canada. We have 2 investments in Israel, but a lot of sophisticated groups don't want to do that. But today there are vehicles developed in the past few years where the U.S. investors can invest in a C Corp, and upon a liquidity event, everything comes together. So you maintain your CCBC status and have all the benefits. Now, some of the issues in investing in Canada in general is that the government tries to mitigate the lack of early stage capital in Canada. Now, Toronto, I lived there for 12 years, left there 20 years ago. In the last 20 years, Toronto has become, in my view, after New York, the next most powerful financial city in North America. It's become a real global powerhouse. And I agree with the comments made about talent and startups. So without looking at where we are in the economic cycle and what happens when you have a downturn, in Canada, and mitigating the startup world has almost done some damage in creating way too many startups. Every university's got incubators. I just talked to a startup as a favor to a friend of mine in Toronto. And at Athabasca, the little community college there had a few startups, and they're all trying to raise money. And when every company and every university starts creating incubators, you have too many startups that have expectations of raising money, and there just isn't that much capital there. And the other weakness that I observe in Canada, and I'm on 2 boards in Canada, is that they're quite a bit behind the leading edge thinking of how you structure deals. I was on 3 calls in the past few months with Canadian startups that came to the Carezza Forum because they have a pretty active Toronto chapter, and I've actually attended events there. And they're still trying to raise money as common shares. We don't invest in common shares. That's a no-no. You're screwing the employees because the common share price is too high, so you can't give them options at low prices, which we want to do. And if there's any kind of liquidity event, and if you look backwards over decades, you find that most startups end up with liquidity events where cash gets distributed. If it's all common shares, then the founders get a bunch of cash and the investors lose a bunch of money. And that's a non-starter for sophisticated investors. And then I also found that in many cases, the lack of experience, and pardon me saying this, maybe it's changed now, but less experience in the past of Canadian lawyers and doing things like an option plan. They do an option plan and I'd say, oh, well, how about this and this? Oh, okay, we'll fix that. They go through 8 iterations. Here you go to Wilson Son Senior, Cooley, and tell you, we do 300 a year. Here's vanilla. Might cost you $1,000 an hour, but you got the thing in one shot. And so I find, and the third thing, which I think is a real issue, and it's a cultural issue, in Canada, most people that I know of my age are playing polo and are retired. Whereas here, people that are older, our retirement consists of helping startups, being on boards and doing angel investing. You look at Vinod Khosla, he's pushing 80 and he's still a very active investor. In Canada, you don't have a lot of that. Like all the friends that I have who did startups and made money, are not, literally now, they don't want to invest in startups, they don't want to get involved on boards, and one of them is playing polo every weekend. So whereas here, so I encourage all the Canadian startups I know, try and get someone from Silicon Valley on your board. They don't need to be paid cash, give them some options, that's all. I don't believe in people paying board members cash at all. Because they'll be more up to snuff on what is vanilla today in terms of how deals are done. So you can get to that very quickly. And they'll also can put you in touch with a lot more investors around here. So I think those are things that are challenging.
So you mentioned maybe lack of funding for the number of startups, and you mentioned mentoring. So the mentoring, obviously, CELS as an organization, this is a good opportunity for me to toot my own horn, or the organization. That's what we want to do. We want, as mentors, to support Canadian startups and give them visibility in this ecosystem. Speaking about the money, the funding, so you mentioned too many incubators and not enough funding. Sam, because you are, again, in that ecosystem and you invest in companies, do you see that also? I mean, in terms of, is most of the money in Canada in investment, like VC level, is it mostly LPs that are in Canada, or do you get your money also? Is there money coming from outside, looking into the ecosystem and saying, this is a great ecosystem to invest in?
I think most of the VC money in Canada is, from the VCAP program, which is basically a federal government program. We're a bit different in that we don't have any institutional money, so none of those type of money. We're all family offices, and our family offices are mostly outside Canada. I would say 3/4 of our capital comes from outside Canada, so it's fresh money into the ecosystem. From U.S., Mexico.
Is this because the Canadian investors are risk averse, or?
I think family offices generally in Canada are much more risk averse than family offices elsewhere. And don't know what's in their backyard. If we were a marijuana company, they would throw money at it. If we were a gold mine, they would throw money at it. But we're doing healthcare. So addressing the incubators, there are way too many incubators, even in the U.S. Every university's got one.
Same thing here. Yes.
Personally, I'm involved with Creative Destruction Lab, which is U of T's incubator. I think it's one of the best in the world. I've seen many of them. It has the best process, the best mentors, the best of the best, and really it's a lot of people giving back, and trying to help. I'm working with McMaster. They have a good biomedical engineering program to try to help them establish something. But you're right. There's at the end of the day, there's that, but that's a good thing. I think that if we, with the way you said, a couple investments in Israel, startup nation. I think if we all sort of, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to a young startup? It's going to fail, but those people have learned something. They're taking some risks. Yeah. They push the envelope, and so yeah, most of them are not going to get funded, but it's good to have that entrepreneurial mentality. that was probably lacking in Canada 10 years ago
Mhm.
and is there now. So, I think early stage capital is our angel groups are not that sophisticated. Kiretsu is very active in Toronto. I know them well, but they tend to raise too little money. What's a healthcare company going to do with $500,000? It doesn't really get them anywhere. They need $5 million to run a proper business plan. So that's the issue, the fundamental issue with Canada, and that's what we do. We're trying to sort of professionalize the seed and Series A round. And
very good. So Marwan, I was going to ask you. So you've been an entrepreneur in Canada, and now you're kind of an investor as an incubator in the US. What are those challenges that you've seen when you were in Montreal?
That's exactly it. I mean, you're completely right. It's the amount of money that you can raise. The 2 million, 3 million is a bit harder versus here. I wouldn't say it's easier, but at least you have a lot more opportunities to do it here. I think the tickets or the check that is written are a lot, from an amount perspective, is a lot lower, which makes it very difficult for a startup to thrive, especially initially. Either you have to have a very risk-averse proposition to investors for them to invest, which does not really exist, or you're going to have to find money outside Canada, so you want to thrive as a startup company. And that was one of the things that I realized, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to move, is to really say, look, I cannot do business without money, so I need to go where the money is, and it's here.
I agree. I agree. There's a much bigger pool of capital here. I've seen companies in Vancouver, a private company, raise 60 million privately from high net worth individuals before it went out to do its A round. So there's a whole range, and it all comes down to the facts and circumstances of the individual company, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the nature of the technology? Who's the management? And that goes to whether preferred shares are offered or common. If you're doing a $250,000 round and an angel comes in and wants preferred shares, right? They're like, there's costs associated with that, right? Papering it, like the cost of capital on that, the loss of control, because to amend the articles in the future, it's by class vote. Like there's a whole bunch of issues, right? And not all investors are created equally. But just getting back to a moment in defense of some lawyers, anyways, maybe not all. Like so far this year in Vancouver, we've helped 6 companies form with material management, like people that have done it serially before on all of them. And at least 3 of them have money lining up for them, right? So, and in those 3 instances, they're offering common shares. So it's all about the individual circumstances, and if you have high demand for what you're offering, you have choice, right? If you don't and you're desperate by nature, then maybe you have to do other things. But not every entity deserves to be funded.
But are these exceptions? So when you speak about the $60 million raised, I mean, again, if you're lining up a team that's an A,
no, I've seen a $20 million one at 30 that we're working on the A round now with VCs right now that had raised 30 Canadian, and then another one that had raised 40. Like not always, but those companies, it's very interesting. Like all of them were common shares up to that point.
Who are they raising from? Are these VCs or?
No, they haven't done their A round yet.
Okay.
So all seed, $40 million.
We wouldn't touch a company if it was
common
shares. We just don't do it. It's just
we don't either.
It's not best practices for sure. And
what are the size of the rounds? Because unless you can
but
raise
there's always
a material
a
amount.
$250,000 you can always put in a safe that converts into the preferred round. You don't have to really paper the entire preferred.
Because if this is not VC, those are big amounts. I mean, 40 million, 30 million for a pre.
That's over my career. It's not every day, but it happens.
Yeah.
And then on the general financing rounds, like most of the paper nowadays is based on the US NVCA model documents, right? They're Canadianized. And the terms and conditions are very much what a company down here would get. And we've helped these 5 or 6, so it's all standardized documents and very cost effective to get it done. So I think it's a bit dangerous to generalize, because sometimes if the opportunity is just incredible, like all of a sudden there's money chasing it, right? If the entrepreneur's done it before and
so we don't want to generalize, but we want to basically see trends and see what volumes are we. I mean, are there 2 or 3 opportunities, or are there more? I mean, here obviously, I think it happens more often. Go ahead.
I'd like
Bob.
to add a comment to that. And I have to say, I respect what you said, but I don't agree with it. I don't think any sophisticated investor that's going to be involved in the company, whether it's venture capital or anybody else, is going to invest in common shares. And today, you're at the tail end of an 11, 12-year boom cycle, and many people in the industry have never seen a downturn. I lived through 4 of them. The next downturn is a question of when, not if. And when it happens, you're going to see a lot of problems happen. And when a few of these companies go through a liquidation issue, whether it's Northern Telecom, and I was on a Canadian government panel 10 years ago on why can't Canadian companies, big ones, survive. You know, ATI got acquired, I was on their board, Northern Telecom blew up and so on. RIM didn't do that well surviving. My point is when you have these bad events, which invariably happen, is when the tire hits the pavement and people investing in common will learn some hard lessons that many of us have learned over the decades and why you don't do common share investing. And you're not doing the employees a favor with a high common price, because then you're issuing options to them at a high price.
Yeah.
So they don't make much money. They're much more incentivized if you raise money in preferred shares or convertible debt, and then and then you do a study which says the common shares are worth very little, and you incentivize management and employees with very low price shares, and they have more incentive.
Yeah.
And the investors are more comfortable. So maybe some people do it. It certainly isn't done by any sophisticated investors here. And Sand Hill manages what, $1 trillion of venture capital. I've never seen a VC do a common share investment.
Okay.
What would a seed round be down here? What would you what would that be? 5
I think
to
it's
10
all over
million?
the place. I mean, obviously you're part of, is it Sand Hill Angels? And
Me?
yeah.
No, I'm the Band of Angels.
Yeah.
I'm
So
also on the Kretzer Forum.
So Joe's question is, what's the seed round like here? I mean, it depends again on the industry, I guess.
Oh, it varies on the deal. You know, some deals only require $500,000 to get the next milestone. Some deals raise $2-3 million. The Kretzer Forum, some companies get through the process and people are raising common shares. And I've looked at those. In fact, 2 of the 3 I mentioned where I was on a call with the management, got through the Kretzer process where there's due diligence, deck and everything else, but they were raising common money. And we just have been burned too often with that. We just don't do that as a policy.
Okay.
And the comment I'd like to add here now, the vanilla model is that even if you're doing a 50, 100K friends and family mode, you do it as seed preferred.
Yeah, or safe.
Or seed safe.
That converts
Yeah.
into the next pref round.
Investors have to get the money out before founders get any cash in any kind of bad event. And if you have common shares.
Okay. So I want to be mindful of time, and I'd like the audience to be able to ask questions. So if there are any questions, we can keep talking, obviously, but if there are any questions that you guys have, please, and please make sure you use the mic just for the people who are actually calling, who are watching. They need to be able to listen to the question. Terry.
Hi guys, thank you so much. That was great. Just a question, because we're seeing this in other sectors where I work for the Canadian consulate, so we're hearing from a lot of mid-size Bay Area companies looking to open up a new office in Canada, and a lot of their concerns, yes, immigration, but also just cost in terms of hiring talent, holding on to talent, which is the key. And it's driving them to look at other locations, and so they're finding the ability to scale here in the Bay Area are reaching their limits depending on the company. And so I'm just kind of curious whether you're hearing that same thesis on the life sciences side as well.
So I can
Please,
question.
Yeah.
CBRS just recently did a study on the best places to do a startup. Toronto's right up there in terms of bang for the buck, right? So it's relatively inexpensive. There's a vast pool of sticky talent. So Toronto's affordable and very livable, even though it's freezing half the time. But that's a good thing, because
that means you won't
it would
die.
be 6 million. It would be 60 million if it was warm, right? So there is there's a large talent pool that's actually very sticky. Our engineers don't want to move because they're making $150,000, and in Toronto they can have a life on that salary. Here you can barely afford the rent, right? So I think scaling. In fact, we just met earlier with a large American entrepreneur who's building in Toronto now because he finds attracting talent and scaling in Toronto is just easier to do it in the valley. So I think from from everything from commercial rent to engineering talent to taxes, and also there's a lot of government support if you're Canadian controlled private corporation, that it's a very attractive place to build a business. And I think our companies go to the US first because the US in healthcare especially are much easier adopters of technology. Canada's the worst, right? Just the last place we go to is our own backyard.
Really?
So our company set up sales office here, right? And maybe some field support and things like that. But as far as the brain trust and the engineers, they're all in Toronto, and that's very scalable.
Yeah.
And just
Right,
I was going to just a shout out, and then let you speak. But there's two people here, Guy, who's in the back, who represents Quebec, by the way, and Joanne, who works with Alberta. So if anyone here has questions specifically about doing business in those two provinces, and sorry, we haven't met yet. Okay, Toronto, Marissa from Ontario. Okay, so all three of them can give you guys, when you're networking, some more insights on doing business in those three provinces. Go ahead. So there was additional comments from Marwan, Pavan, and Joe.
I was just going to say in Vancouver as well, like we have the exchange rate advantage, if you want to call it that. And then there have been lots of tech companies, maybe less on the life sciences front, that have set up operations in Vancouver. And part of it goes to the points you're raising earlier on recruiting talent that might be otherwise have challenges of either staying in or getting into the United States. But it's happening. We have a very tight real estate market as a consequence, right, on the commercial real estate front, I mean.
And I just want to add, it also depends on the context too. So it depends on the type of companies. If you're talking about Amazon relocating to Toronto, Vancouver, that's a different story than a startup trying to make some that is driven by obviously fundraising and then technology. So I think these comments, I agree with them, but I just want to put an asterisk in there saying it really depends on the company they're trying to bring to Canada. So
Pavan, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I work with large companies, medium companies, and startups and small companies, and I would say that what I've started to notice, and this is since I've been here in the Bay Area, is that companies are opening offices in Canada also because not just to retain talent that is facing U.S. immigration issues, but also because they're saying that the market here is super saturated and it's like very difficult to get talent and keep them. Whereas in Canada, they feel like they have a more long-term objective in mind. And I feel startups, especially the ones that are relying on key individuals who are really the foundation of their startup, they're the first to also look to Canada as well, because they're able, especially if they're immigrant entrepreneurs, able to really keep all of the individuals that they need to be close by. There's a proximity, there's the ease of business, there's the ease of travel back and forth between the US and Canada. And I think all of those factors have really made it a good place to open an office.
Very good. Any other questions from the audience? The other thing I was going to say, okay, I was actually going to mention your name. So Terry and Irina, because I mentioned the provinces, but also the Canadian consulate, and Irina is the life science trade delegate for Canada. So also a good person to speak to if you have questions about life science in Canada. And Terry oversees the whole trade group. Sorry, I don't know the title, but at the Canadian consulate. Okay, very good.
Thank you, Hajim, and to all our panelists. And hi, everyone. I have a question maybe for some of the companies that are calling in, so Canadian companies in Canada looking to attract U.S. investment here. You know, some of we started talking about some things for them to think about that will make them attractive in terms of corporate structure or structuring some of their deals to U.S. VCs here. So if you have any thoughts on that. And then also to U.S. life science investors that are looking at investing in Canadian companies, maybe if there's some discussion on demystifying some of the challenges or opportunities, like maybe from a tax perspective or how they're looking at making those investments, and if you could comment on that.
Anyone would like to take that?
I'm happy to talk about tax. Happy to talk about the tax thing.
Yeah, we'll take team.
Okay. So we have investors from all over the world. we have never had a tax issue. Canada is really smart about tax reciprocity with other jurisdictions, whether it be US, Mexico, Barbados, UK. You're not going to wind up paying more tax because you invested in Canada. You're going to pay the same sort of taxes you would have paid as if you invested in a US company if you're American, so if you invested in a Mexican company if you're Mexican. So it takes a little bit of finessing. It's not like but there is no tax issue. So the mystique of entering a new jurisdiction with all the complexities of the tax structure, it's not.
Okay.
It doesn't exist.
So a side question to this one. So why do you think then there aren't as many, and maybe Paul, you can also take part of that question. Why aren't they more? So you're talking, for example, we spoke before this panel, and you were saying a lot of your LPs are in the Middle East, and so how come we don't have more U.S. investors investing in Canadian?
Well, I think the U.S. is an exception. I mean, if you're in Mexico or in the Middle East, to see the kind of innovation that's taking place in Canada, you don't have that in your country. So you're going to want to invest somewhere where innovation is taking place.
Okay.
So you got to pick versus the U.S. or Canada.
Yeah.
A lot of people are avoiding the U.S. for many different reasons. So Canada's popping up on their radar.
I see.
And more we're winning battles. Like he said, a financial powerhouse is Toronto, but it's an innovation powerhouse too. And we're getting that known. But the U.S. there's so much opportunity here. There's so many deals here. They don't really have to look elsewhere. Whereas,
but the deals are probably more competitive.
We still have U.S. investors in coming to Canada, but they're not early stage investors.
Okay. Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. The issue is really deal flow. Band of Angels, which is one of the groups I'm very active in, we digest 1,000 startups a year. We invest in 20. Okay. And so there's so much deal flow here, and there are probably a dozen angel groups around here, the Bay Area alone. There are probably, I don't know, 30, 40 incubators. So when we have to process 1,000 companies a year, we like things that are vanilla. People fill out a one pager and questions are there, and then we go bang, 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 and then the final maybe 50 present for an hour and go through due diligence and all that. The problem with Canadian companies, they're not exposed. The issue, someone from here is not going to travel to Canada to meet with the company. It's 2 days travel. When ATI still existed in Toronto, I was on the board of ATI, and the reason I was on the board of ATI as a semiconductor executive was that, my other companies had offices there and I had family there, so I didn't mind traveling to Toronto for a board meeting. But if you're here and you have no reason to go to Toronto, you're not going to spend 2 days traveling for a board meeting.
So you're saying two issues here. I'm hearing the fact that the Canadian startups are not exposed here, but also the fact that investors here, once they invest, they wouldn't want to invest in a company in Canada because they don't want to have to go for board meetings and things.
No, that's a separate board issue. But for investing, people here, if you're full of startups around you, why go look for other ones? And so they have to come to there. Now, many of us, like one of the Life Science Angels members, brought a company to the Band of Angels called ValFix, an Israeli company. I brought a company to the Band of Angels called Beam, an Israeli company. I brought a company to the Band of Angels called InBay. They're a cybersecurity company out of Ottawa, where I'm on the board. So bands and groups of angels will look at deals, but someone's going to take the initiative to bring it to them.
Yeah, but what about the argument that the Canadian opportunity is cheaper? Like meaning that
it's cheaper, that's a benefit. But there are other, no question, the company where I'm still chairman, Geo Semiconductor, we do the processors for automotive cameras. Raised over $100 million. We're a big company now. Put a new CEO in 5 years ago. We have a big operation in Canada at Markham, and we're hiring there because it's hard to hire talent here when you got the Apples and Facebooks and trying to suck everybody that's alive into their ecosystem.
I just want to comment. I agree with Paul. Ben of Angel Life Science. I'm also a member of Life Science. So the deal flow is referred through the members. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to say, well, look, if you have Canadian companies who are wanting to get some angel funding, maybe they should go through this network here so we can put them in front of our current.
So let me give you something. I've been bugging, so I occasionally attend the C100 events, which I think are a waste of time. People just drink beer and try and shout at each other in the crowd. I've been telling people for years, and as you know, we're both on the Canadian Studies thing in Berkeley. Why doesn't the Canadian government set up a simple website that lets Canadian companies go on there and say, we're looking for a board member with these skills? Just that. that millions of Canadians around here, some of them would not mind being on boards of Canadian companies,
Yeah.
but how the hell do they know which board to be on?
So that's what CELS and the Canadian consulate need to be doing. That's what we're trying to do, right?
I must have talked to the C100 leadership many times about this, and they'll say, good idea, but they just don't do it. They're too busy.
Joanne, you want to?
And then you just do little things in Canadians. You want to be a Canadian board? Look at this website. Yeah, sorry.
So just to answer that, there's an organization started by a Canadian here in the Bay Area called the Board List. Are you familiar with it? Because it's a marketplace to match board members with companies that are looking. I will send you some information on it, but we have over 14,000 users on it. And that's specifically what we're doing. And it's cross-border, it's global. We've only got about 10% of the database that comes from Canada, but Canadian companies can be attracting board members from the US.
So
anyway,
I think that's a great initiative. I think in the world of business, you have to network. So you cannot just go into a website and say, well, gee, let me see if Mr. Joe here is available. So I don't think that anybody would, I think it has to go through people who are a little bit sort of the nodes in the network that can actually be.
But that's the reason why boards have a problem with the boards and why they've been so homogeneous is because you only go up to your network. So it is a source. It's a source for uncovering new talent and emerging talent that's available that isn't in your typical homogeneous network. But we also encourage the candidates, of course, to say this isn't about getting on this list or some other list and saying now you're going to be on a board. You still have to network. And so the board list does obviously provide and encourage opportunities for that.
Obviously, I mean, what just said, I think what the Canadian consulate is doing through their programs, the Dose of the Valley, the CTAs, what CELS is doing, I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do, is give visibility to Canadian startups here, and we have, one here that's very promising, and basically put them in front of Canadians who are here, who are C-level executives that can be on those boards. I mean, so I guess there is an effort in that sense, but obviously it's just the beginning, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Let me add a comment to that. Like I attended an event, was it last year, where there were a lot of Canadian startups here, and I think it was a great event. The issue, though, is that I got invited to it through, I think it was Richard, or our own ecosystem, where the Israeli government put on an event yesterday in San Francisco, and they were smart enough. They contacted every angel group, and of course, the Band of Angels put an email out saying, by the way, there's an Israeli event in San Francisco. If you want to attend, here's a link. And so a bunch of people that I knew said, oh, that'd be interesting. We attended. So I think when you arrange startups to come here, try and plug into all the angel groups and the vast network of those in time so they can get into newsletters or they can get it in their own distributions to get more of those people in.
So I think the Canadian event you're referring to was the Dose of the Valley event earlier this year at Wilson Sonsini. And again, the idea there is to match the startups with mentors who can potentially become advisors to the company, introduce them to potential board members and things like that. Okay, very good comment. Any other questions from the audience? I don't know in terms of time, Ro, if
we're still good.
We're still good. Okay.
I just have an online question.
Sure, and then we'll take the online one first, and then you can keep the mic.
So it's actually from Catherine Love, who is the sales director, and you guys already basically answered your question around the obstacles that U.S. investors have when they're trying to invest in Canadian health companies. But is there anything else that's also a challenge, but also a solution that you found? So if there's any other thoughts of obstacles, but also solutions to that.
This is about investing in Canadian companies?
Yeah, with U.S. investors. Yeah.
Well,
Joe.
For angels, sometimes it's the inertia or the fear of the unknown. And if you're used to working with C Corps or Delaware Corps or whatever you want to call it, they're used to it. They know how it works. It's easy, right? Dealing with a foreign jurisdiction and foreign corporate laws and foreign securities laws and all of that sometimes can be daunting. But at least 2-3 times a year, during my career when VCs, like sophisticated VCs looking at material investments, the first phone call is always over tax, right? Should we be re-domiciling this company, right? And it takes about 1 hour with a tax partner, and you go through all the reasons why it doesn't make a difference. And if they've invested in Canada before, you don't have the call. If not, it's an education process. And then the investment, invariably, I've never re-domiciled the company over that. The adverse tax consequences are such you wouldn't do it. Plus, there aren't significant advantages, right? And at the end of the day, they've stayed in Canada. The evolution in Canada to use the NVCA model documents, Canadianized, and once you deal with sophisticated VCs, you can get over that through dialogue. And if they really like the opportunity and the management, they're willing to invest at least time to have the conversation.
Okay. Very good. Question?
Yeah, I have two questions for you. First one is that when I look at this, I realize that many of you have experience with medical device related industries or healthcare, but what other sectors of life sciences would Canada be interested in investing in, or people can think of startups?
So, I mean, one thing that I would just mention, and then I'll let them speak, is both Toronto and Montreal are big AI centers. I mean, there's some prominent luminaries in AI in those two places. So there's a big push there. I mean, again, I'm sure speaking to the Ontario delegate, they can tell you more about this, and with Guy in Quebec. And that's obviously AI has a life science component to it. So that's one. And I don't know if you guys can comment on anything else or.
There's a thriving biotech pharma ecosystem there. I would say, that's an area where it's much harder to build companies because of the capital intensity.
Exactly.
But there are great emerging companies in that sector. We don't look at it because we have no expertise in that sector.
And that's where probably the majority of my practice is. Like, we have one of the largest life sciences practices in the country, which includes pharma right down to startups, but definitely on the West Coast. And I would say a majority of those are in the pharma, however you want to define it.
And I know Montreal. Yeah. Montreal also has a big pharma. I mean, Richard, I know, has some experience there. So there is some pharma in Montreal, significant. Huh?
Lots.
Lots. Lots
That's
in
right.
Montreal. Yeah, and through your.
Absolutely, because of the R&D tax credit and things like that. I think there's a lot in pharmaceutical companies that. I just want to comment on the AI. I think this is the biggest opportunity that Canada would have to jump a little bit to the forefront, because AI, what people need is all the data sets, clinical data for people to be able to analyze. And I think Canada has pan-Canadian sort of data set that allows it to be very strong in diverse environment and population. So, I see it that's sort of the next force of Canada. If people can come up with really nice AI companies, I think that would be with the data sets that are part of the local ecosystem. I think that's very, very good.
And I think there are initiatives, we can't talk about them, but there's some initiatives underway to compile massive data sets.
Yeah.
And if that comes to fruition, the companies that can mine and analyze that data, I think we're going to have tremendous insights. So.
And then even my company that I'm working for right now, we're thinking about using, or at least can we have an office over there where we can help grow an AI company, because the biggest hurdle behind the AI company is the data set. And then if we have easier access to it in Canada to train at an AI component, I think that would be fantastic. So in my mind, I think that's the future.
So let me add a comment on AI. It's a very hot technology, but it's a technology. It's not a product or a service.
Yes, I agree with that.
And there are hundreds of chip companies working on AI chips. Maybe 2% will survive. There's a lot of money spent on AI, but when you do an evaluation of a service or a product, if AI can help that product service succeed, great, you should be using AI. But AI itself is not an investable vehicle. You don't invest in it. The governments can for research.
Absolutely.
Because they create the talent and the foundation, but it's not for an investor to invest in directly.
Yeah, I
No,
agree.
obviously. So we're talking about use of AI in imaging for
Right.
cancer.
Absolutely.
So all of that's
So
what
all that-
I mean. So the utilization of AI, and then you still have to have the data sets,
Exactly.
because you've taken those pictures or you know the profile of your patient. Heart failures is a big problem too. So I think there's great opportunities there.
I fully agree that Toronto, Montreal are hotbeds for AI. I don't know the Montreal. I know it's got a lot of investment, but
Yeah.
Toronto has the Vector Institute. Arguably, Professor Hinton out of U of T is the inventor of machine learning / AI. So there's a lot of graduate students that are really smart and are offered a lot of money to come here and don't because they want to stay close. I totally agree that, I mean, most of our companies, especially the imaging companies, are have an AI machine learning person on staff, you trying to learn more and more with each data point. So they're not pure AI, they are AI adapted into healthcare.
And I know, just the last point, and I know you have another question. Alberta has an initiative on using that data. So Health City, Edmonton, I think, and Calgary, basically, for US companies that want to go there, give them access to patient data to be able to work with that and get that information. So there are initiatives. You had another question?
This is not my second question, but still, I know that AI would still be beneficial to healthcare industry, but how about other sectors like synthetic biology or plastic industry, food industry? Is Canada
Materials.
investing at all in all these?
For sure.
AI is used everywhere.
Everywhere.
Okay.
Everywhere.
Materials.
Can I go with my second
Advertising.
question?
Sure.
Okay.
That's the third question then.
Yeah, but that was the
Go for it.
1.5 question.
Yeah.
So my second question is that my PhD is from the University of Waterloo in Canada, and what is Canada doing to ensure and retain the talent within Canada? Because my experience has been, we were 8 colleagues, and I know all of them are now in the US, either in California or in Boston, because they couldn't find positions that match their.
What's your PhD in?
My PhD is in chemical engineering with a focus in biotechnology,
Okay.
bioengineering. So,
So Sam, are you gonna get a job?
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, we retain a lot of PhDs in
I
our
was
companies.
joking, yeah.
But you're right. I mean, at that level, the critical mass is here. There's no question about it. But there's pockets of it in Canada. So if you had 10, maybe 2 would have stayed in Canada, but you were 8. So they all went.
but the two that
The next 2
stayed
will stay in
back,
Canada. The next 2.
the 2 that stayed back, at the most they could find was a research associate position, which doesn't even match what they actually studied and worked for.
That's a very pertinent question.
So
then
how do you retain the talent there?
Yeah, so I moved from Canada to here. So I think the motivation is the ecosystem it's not matured as much as here. So
but it's getting there.
It's getting there. Yeah. So I think you tap out fairly quickly, and then you have to look for other opportunities. And then here things keep growing as far as technology and whatnot. So we talked about the commercialization, aspect of things. So universities are great, they do great research, they have a lot of things in their bios. Here at Stanford, every other student that I talk to, they want to build a company. Over there is every person that I would talk to, they want to still keep their day job and then do research, and that drive towards commercialization is not there. So as a result of it, the ecosystem is not as expanded as here.
And I think what's not fair is that, again, in terms of comparison, I think Canada does so much better than all the other places. But this is the mecca of everything. And a lot of people say, the Silicon Valley is a mindset. I think for others to catch up with this, so it's not fair to compare the two.
So my personal experience is I applied to, I think, 7 jobs in the US and maybe 100 applications in Canada. I didn't get a single interview in Canada. I interviewed all the 7 jobs in the US, but they all had issues with giving me a visa. I'm a Canadian permanent resident, but not a citizen. So all the people that I know face similar situations. That's why they moved here. So my second question is that I personally knew a person who was
That's
a
true. That's
director.
2.5.
And yes, that is 2.5, but I think this should be brought to the Canadian immigration or
So Pavan,
Canada
do you want to
companies.
address it? I mean, this is.
Yeah, I mean, so
I want to finish my question.
Oh, sorry.
Is that okay? So I personally knew the person who was at the director position in Biogen. They do contract manufacturing at Patheon in Ontario, Brampton area. So what they say is that, because I had applied to that company too, what they say is that they do not they do not want to look at your CV. They just want to look at CVs who do these 1-year crash courses in, say, analytics. Or so how do you ensure that even if US companies are investing in Canada, they invest for positions that do the actual work and not just,
You want to.
I mean, one thing that I would say, and I think that when did you graduate?
6 years.
6 years. So I would say that from my experience, especially recently, a lot of companies are moving their R&D into Canada, and the main reason is the visa issue that they're facing here in the United States. And as you know, because you've gone through the permanent resident process, it's significantly easier in Canada than it is here. And depending on where you're from, it can be a daunting process here, which is really a lengthy process. And when you have a lengthy process, you have a lot of uncertainty. So a lot of my clients that are here, that are in senior roles in biotech or tech, they are moving to Canada with the understanding that they're going to be able to become permanent residents. They can start a company. There's so many opportunities that move. Whereas here you kind of are capped. If you don't have, I mean, your short term may be better but like your long term, I think in Canada is also a real consideration for a lot of people who have been here for a long time and are struggling to stay. And I mean, I obviously have a very unique experience. I'm dealing with people who are moving to Canada from the United States. So my exposure to that is quite intense, I would say.
Paul, you wanted to add something?
So, it's two sides of the same coin. The reason people have subsidiaries in Canada, and my last ship company, when I'm still chairman, we have a big team there, is because talent's available. Talent's available, that means there aren't as many jobs. So if you're looking for a job, there aren't as many opportunities in Canada. Whereas here, there's a shortage of talent, exacerbated by some of these visa issues that were mentioned. So of course, when I finished McGill, I went to Berkeley Graduate School, got a PhD there, spent a year teaching there. Then I started applying for a job. Well, if I wanted an R&D job, which was kind of, in hindsight, probably not the best place to be successful, you might be more, get an MBA or something. There was only BNR and Northern Telecom. They didn't give me a job offer. So I went to RCA Labs in Princeton and stayed in the US until I spent another reason 10 years in Canada. But that's a big issue in Canada. The fact that people like to go there because they can hire the talent tells you there's excess talent.
Yeah.
In fact, that people hire you here is because there's a shortage of talent.
So the thing here is, again, I think the point they're making is, even though the prospect for Canada Canada is promising, it's growing, it's still a factor of 1 to 100 in terms of size of the market. So obviously, if you apply here and there, you have, an easier, let's say, a better probability of getting a job here than there. I mean, but that, again, that's not true only for Canada. That's true of anywhere outside of the Silicon Valley.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just maybe a quick comment. I think the situation has evolved in Canada since the past year. A lot of people are getting retired, and we are also seeking for talents. So I mean, and there's a lot of organization as well in Canada. I'm thinking about MyTax, who's actually in all university linking with PhD and postdoc to make sure they can have, a work possibility in medium-sized and big companies. So if they're not interested to do, research and work in laboratories, they can, link with MyTax and try to get a job in a big company. So I'm just saying that since 5 years, we've seen many strategies in Canada to seek for talent and as well make sure that people like you don't go. But you might get into a path where you didn't get that kind of information, but it's changing a lot. maybe another comment as well on, VC not interested maybe to travel to Toronto or Montreal. I think this is changing as well. AI is one of the reason why, and I've seen a lot of VC. I'm meeting with VC since 2 years here, and I have already 5 people interested to come to Montreal, maybe in summertime. During the jazz festival would be a good idea, but a lot of VC wants to meet with CDPQ, which is a strong institutional investor. And Paul, I'm inviting you for next summer trip in Montreal to meet.
I'm on the board of a company in Montreal, so I come there every 3 months anyway.
So you don't even have to pay for a ticket. Isn't that amazing? Very good. 3.5, 4.5. No, you don't.
We have some questions.
Okay.
One question is, how can the Canadian ecosystem solve the management challenge in the life sciences? How can we attract or develop skilled, experienced company leaders?
Very good question.
So now we're talking about, and I think that question was brought up at the beginning of our conversation. There's the talent, which is the actual engineers that you need, but they're also, we're talking C-level talent and board talent. Is there,
So
a lot of people feel that there's a challenge there.
There's a challenge.
Okay.
But success breeds success. You need people to exit their companies and go to another company. You need that cycle. We haven't had here. They've had the cycle five times since the 80s, right?
Yeah.
We're just starting that cycle
Exactly.
where we have people who were successful, like mentioned Rim, who's giving back and helping young entrepreneurs. That's just starting now.
Yep.
And attracting Americans to Toronto is not that hard to sell. I mean, if they're in beautiful place like here, or it's a hard to sell. But if they're from Minneapolis, Toronto's actually warmer.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So so they feel at home.
You should use that as your marketing tagline.
Yeah.
It is warmer
Come
than
to Canada,
Minneapolis.
it's warmer. And Minneapolis is a hotbed for medtech, as you know. Right? So I think it's a challenge. But it's more and more challenging. We're winning, and now our exits are happening, and we're having a lot of Shopify. People are spinning out of that. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's building that next generation management team.
I think the issue with Canada, and it came up in a few questions, your question, the one online, is that they keep comparing it to the gold standard, which is the Bay Area, and that's been here like historically, and you can't get there in like 5-10 years. I mean, it's a long time. Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to add something.
Sure.
I've been seeing this a lot lately, and I think it's something that's been new in my practice anyway, is that there's a lot of U.S. individuals who are here who are highly skilled managers, and what they're doing is they're taking on advisory roles in Canada for short periods of time, and not just board meetings, but truly being more managerial and taking that type of role. But they happen to be based here, and they'll be traveling back and forth more. And I think it's because their interest is peaked and they're moving towards that. But it's still, the move.
And again, that's one of the huge advantages of Canada. It's its proximity to the US compared to Europeans trying to replicate that from far away. I think that's one advantage that Canada has.
Yeah, and Vancouver's in the same corridor, right? Same time zone. And the majority, I'm not even sure I can think of one material life sciences company that I work with that doesn't have a US director. And almost all of them have a US subsidiary and have some management employed in the United States. It's very much a cross-border Cascadia kind of thing going on, right?
Which is great. One more question? Yeah.
If you are an angel investor looking at early deals, there are tax issues when investing in a Canadian-based company. Can you speak to the impact of Section 1202 and 1244 in the U.S. tax code? They're very specific.
Can you?
So I'm not a tax lawyer in Canada, let alone in the United States, but just to echo what was said earlier, over the course of my career, every time there's a discussion about tax and whether the company should re-domicile and whatnot, and invariably in all cases, I've only ever once re-domiciled a company not back to the United States.
But this was, so I think the question was for U.S. investor, investing in a startup in Canada, how does that impact their taxes? Is that, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was a question. I would say if you have a proper tax person helping you, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to comment on that.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
I'll agree that, and we invest in Canadian companies. I agree that it's not an issue. However, if you're a big organization that's pouring through a lot of things, last thing you want to start looking is at notes which are different for GAAP versus Canadian tax law. And so it's not vanilla. What investors want to see is they want to go through all these deals and they want to see it in a format where they don't have to do any more work.
Yeah.
That's the reason it's an issue. But
maybe that's a call of
action,
cultural action for the Canadian government.
I haven't seen it as an issue.
Irina is going to take care of it.
Yes.
She's going to speak to the Prime Minister and have it resolved.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think it's been a very, very interesting and insightful panel. I want to thank all of you guys. Thank you so much for coming and for taking the time. Thanks. And go Canada, I guess.